Back in the fall of 2015, out near the Cascades in Washington, I was 41 and working security for a small logging operation. The crew left their equipment overnight about 2 miles into the forest, and I was supposed to keep an eye on things. I'd set up trail cameras around the machinery, just standard protocol. On November 12th, those cameras captured something I still can't fully explain. Footage of Bigfoot, and I know how that sounds, destroying a bulldozer with its bare hands. The reason why shook me more than the attack itself. It wasn't random, it wasn't aggression. Bigfoot was protecting its home. I still have the footage. I've never released it. I thought the shocking part would be what's on the video. It wasn't. The job started simple enough. A timber company out of Seattle had bought logging rights to a section of forest in the Cascades, about 15 miles from the nearest town. The area was remote. Dense pine, steep ridges, barely any cell service. They needed someone to watch the equipment overnight. Theft wasn't common out here, but the machines were expensive. Bulldozers, excavators, industrial chainsaws. They couldn't risk someone walking off with a $50,000 piece of gear. I'd been doing security work for 3 years. Mostly construction sites, warehouses, nothing exciting. This job paid well, and I didn't mind the isolation. I'd park my truck near the site at dusk, do a walkthrough, check the cameras, then sit in the cab with coffee and a book. Quiet work. The kind where nothing happens and everyone's happy about it. The crew was small. 5 guys, all experienced. The foreman's name was Marcus Webb. He'd been logging for 20 years, knew these forests better than anyone. He told me on my first day that they'd be working this site for about 6 weeks, clearing a 12-acre section. Standard operation. Cut the trees, haul them out, replant later. He seemed like a good guy. Honest, professional. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. I'd arrive at 6, the crew would pack up and leave by 6:30, and I'd be alone until morning. The cameras never picked up anything. Sometimes a deer would wander through. Once a black bear nosed around one of the trucks, but mostly just darkness and silence. Then, in early November, things started feeling different. I noticed it first in the forest itself. The usual sounds. Owls, wind through the pines, small animals moving through underbrush, went quiet. Not all at once. Gradually. By the second week of November, the nights were too silent. I'd sit in my truck and hear nothing, just my own breathing. I mentioned it to Marcus. He shrugged it off. Animals move around, he said. They'll come back. But I could tell he'd noticed it too. The crew had started talking about strange things. Footprints too big to be human. A smell like wet dog and rotting vegetation. One of the guys swore he heard something walking around the equipment one night after they'd left. Heavy footsteps. But when he went back to check, nothing was there. I didn't believe in Bigfoot. I'd heard the stories, sure. Everyone who spends time in the Pacific Northwest has heard them. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, some giant ape man living in the forest. It sounded like campfire nonsense, but I also couldn't ignore what I was feeling. That creeping sense that something was watching, that we weren't alone out here. On November 10th, I decided to add more cameras. I told Marcus it was standard protocol, that I wanted better coverage of the site. He approved it. I set up 6 trail cameras total, positioned around the perimeter of the work area. High resolution, night vision capable, motion activated. If anything came near the equipment, I'd have it on video. That night, I did my usual walkthrough. Everything looked normal. The bulldozer was parked near a half-cleared section of forest. The excavator sat beside a pile of logs. Chainsaws and smaller tools were locked in a storage container. I checked each camera, made sure they were recording, then settled into my truck. Around 10 o'clock, I heard something. A low sound, almost like a groan. It came from somewhere west of the site, deeper in the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the truck. The air was cold, and a light fog had rolled in. I shone the light toward the sound, but I couldn't see anything. The forest was a wall of darkness. I waited, listening. The sound came again, louder this time, a deep, guttural call that didn't match any animal I knew. It made the hair on my neck stand up. I got back in the truck and locked the doors. I told myself it was probably an elk, or maybe a bear, but I didn't believe it. The next morning I checked the cameras. 5 of them showed nothing, just empty forest, but the 6th camera, the one positioned near the bulldozer, had captured something at 11:47 p.m. I watched the footage on my laptop and my hands started shaking. A figure walked into frame, tall, easily 8 feet. Its body was covered in dark brown fur. It moved on 2 legs like a human, but its proportions were wrong. Too broad, too muscular. It approached the bulldozer slowly, almost cautiously. Then it stopped and looked directly at the camera. For 3 seconds, its face filled the frame. Flat nose, heavy brow, eyes that reflected the infrared light like an animal's. Then it turned and walked out of frame. I watched the footage 5 times. I didn't know what to think. It looked like Bigfoot. It moved like the descriptions I'd heard, but seeing it on video in clear digital footage was different. This wasn't some blurry photo from the 1970s. This was real, high definition, undeniable. I called Marcus, told him I'd captured something on camera. He came out to the site within an hour. I showed him the footage. He watched in silence. When it ended, he looked at me. "That's Bigfoot," he said quietly. Marcus wanted to keep working. "We've got a contract," he said. "We can't just stop because something's walking around out here." I understood his position, but I also felt uneasy. The footage showed Bigfoot approaching the equipment. It hadn't touched anything. It hadn't caused damage, but it had been there, close. And the way it looked at the camera felt deliberate, like it knew it was being watched. We decided to continue, but with precautions. I'd add more cameras. The crew would work during daylight only. No one would stay late. And I'd keep monitoring overnight. Marcus said he'd contact the company, let them know what we'd found. I didn't think they'd believe him. I was right. The regional manager laughed it off. "Just keep the equipment safe," he said. "I don't care if Bigfoot's doing a tap dance out there." The crew was less dismissive. When Marcus showed them the footage, they went quiet. One of the guys, a logger named Ray, said he wanted to quit. "I'm not messing with Bigfoot," he said. "That thing could kill us." Marcus talked him into staying, but I could see the fear in Ray's eyes. We all felt it. That night, I set up 8 cameras. I covered every angle of the site. If Bigfoot came back, I'd have complete documentation. I sat in my truck, drinking coffee, watching the monitors I'd brought with me. The feeds showed empty forest, machines sitting silent in the dark. Nothing moved. At 10:15 p.m., every camera went black. Not offline, just black, like something had covered the lenses. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the truck. The air smelled wrong. That wet dog smell, but stronger. I walked toward the nearest camera, shining my light ahead. When I reached it, I saw why the feed had gone dark. Mud. Someone had smeared mud across the lens. I checked the other cameras. All of them. Mud on every single lens. Thick, deliberate smears. Whatever had done this knew what the cameras were. Knew what they were for. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just an animal wandering through. This was intelligent. Intentional. I cleaned the lenses and went back to my truck. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my doors locked, watching the tree line. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps, heavy, slow, circling the site. I never saw what made them, but I knew. Bigfoot was out there, and it was watching me. The attack happened on November 12th. I wasn't there when it started. I'd left the site at 6 a.m., same as always. The morning crew was scheduled to arrive at 7. I went home, planning to sleep for a few hours before my next shift. But at 8:30, my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Get back here," he said. "Now." I drove back to the site. When I arrived, the crew was standing in a circle, staring at the bulldozer, or what was left of it. The machine had been flipped onto its side. The metal panels were torn off, bent and twisted like aluminum foil. The engine block was exposed, components ripped out and scattered across the ground. Hydraulic fluid pooled in the dirt. The tracks were pulled apart. It looked like something had systematically destroyed it. Marcus saw me and waved me over. "Did you see anything last night?" he asked. I shook my head. "I left at 6. Everything was fine." He pointed at the bulldozer. "This happened between 6 and 7, before we got here." I stared at the damage. It was worse up close. The metal wasn't just bent, it was torn, like something had grabbed it with its hands and ripped it apart. Ray was pale. "No animal did this," he said. "No bear, no person. Look at it." He was right. The force required to flip a bulldozer was immense. The machine weighed over 20 tons, and the way the metal was torn suggested incredible strength. Strength beyond anything human. I checked the cameras. 3 of them had been destroyed, smashed. The memory cards were missing, but 5 cameras were still intact. I pulled the footage and loaded it onto my laptop. Marcus and the crew gathered around. "If something did this, we'll see it," I said. The footage started at 6:04 a.m. The site was empty. The bulldozer sat upright, undamaged. At 6:11, movement appeared at the edge of frame. Bigfoot, the same creature from before. But this time it wasn't cautious. It walked straight toward the bulldozer. Its movements were purposeful, angry. At 6:13, Bigfoot reached the machine. It grabbed the side of the bulldozer with both hands. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the machine started to tilt. Bigfoot was lifting it, flipping it. The bulldozer rolled onto its side with a crash that the camera's audio picked up clearly. Then Bigfoot started tearing into it, ripping off panels, pulling out components. It worked methodically, like it knew exactly what it was doing. We watched in silence as Bigfoot destroyed the bulldozer. The footage was crystal clear, every detail visible. Its fur, its muscles flexing under the skin, the expression on its face, focused, determined. At one point, it stopped and looked directly at one of the cameras. Then, it walked over and smashed it. The feed went black. The next camera picked up the rest. Bigfoot moved to the excavator. It didn't flip this one. Instead, it tore off the hydraulic arm, ripping it from its mounting. The metal screamed as it bent. Bigfoot threw the arm 30 feet. Then it moved to the chainsaws. It picked up each one and smashed them against the ground, methodically, one by one. The entire attack lasted 11 minutes. When it was finished, Bigfoot stood in the center of the destruction. It looked around as if surveying its work. Then it turned and walked back into the forest. The footage ended at 6:24 a.m. No one spoke. We just stared at the screen. Marcus rewound the footage and played it again and again. We watched Bigfoot flip the bulldozer 3 times. Each time it seemed more impossible, more real. "We need to call the police," Ray said. Marcus shook his head. "And tell them what? That Bigfoot destroyed our equipment? They'll laugh us out of the county." Ray pointed at the laptop. "We have footage, proof. They can't ignore that." But Marcus was right. I'd worked enough security jobs to know how this would go. The police would come out, take statements, maybe look at the footage, but they wouldn't believe it. They'd call it a hoax, say we faked the video to cover up negligence or vandalism. The insurance company would fight the claim. The timber company would blame us. We'd lose our jobs, maybe face charges. "We can't show this to anyone," Marcus said. "Not yet. Not until we understand what we're dealing with." I looked at him. "What do you mean, understand? We just watched Bigfoot destroy $200,000 of equipment. What's there to understand?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why did it do this? That's what I want to know. It came here. It targeted the machines. It didn't attack us. It attacked the equipment. Why?" I thought about that. He was right. Bigfoot had been around the site for days. It could have attacked the crew, could have hurt someone, but it didn't. It waited until we were gone. Then it destroyed the machines. "It's protecting something," I said. The words came out before I fully understood them, but once I said them, I knew they were true. "It's protecting the forest. It doesn't want us here." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's what I think too." He looked at the destroyed bulldozer. The question is, what do we do about it? The timber company sent an investigator, a woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in equipment damage claims. She arrived the next day, walked through the site, took photos, interviewed the crew. When she asked what happened, Marcus told her the truth. Sort of. He said something had attacked the machines overnight. Something large. Possibly a bear. Sarah didn't buy it. "A bear didn't do this," she said, pointing at the bulldozer. "This is deliberate destruction. Vandalism." Marcus offered to show her the footage. She agreed. We sat in Marcus's trailer, and I played the video on my laptop. Sarah watched without expression. When it ended, she closed the laptop. "That's a man in a suit," she said. I stared at her. "What?" "A man in a gorilla suit. Obviously." She stood up. "I don't know what you're trying to pull, but insurance fraud is a serious crime. I'm recommending the company deny this claim and pursue legal action." Marcus tried to argue, but Sarah wasn't listening. She left the site 20 minutes later. The timber company called that afternoon. They were suspending operations. Pending investigation. Marcus and the crew were put on unpaid leave. I was fired. I drove home in shock. I'd just lost my job because I'd shown footage of Bigfoot. Real, actual Bigfoot. And no one believed it. Sarah had looked at clear, high-definition video and decided it was fake, because the alternative, that Bigfoot was real, was too impossible. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I watched the footage again. There was no way it was a man in a suit. The proportions were wrong. The movements were too fluid. The strength was too great. No human could flip a bulldozer. No costume could look that real. But Sarah had dismissed it instantly. And if she didn't believe it, who would? I started researching. I found hundreds of Bigfoot reports from the Pacific Northwest. Sightings, footprints, audio recordings. Most were dismissed as hoaxes, but some were compelling. And a pattern emerged. Bigfoot was often seen near logging operations, near construction sites, near areas where humans were encroaching on wilderness. And in several cases, equipment had been damaged, destroyed. One report from Oregon in 2003 described a similar incident. A bulldozer flipped overnight, machinery torn apart, no explanation. The logging company blamed vandals, but a worker had seen something. A large, hairy figure walking through the site. He'd reported it to the police. They'd laughed at him. Another report from Northern California in 2008. Same thing. Equipment destroyed. Footage captured on a security camera. But the quality was too poor to be conclusive. The company buried the report. Didn't want the publicity. I realized what I was seeing. A pattern of behavior. Bigfoot wasn't randomly attacking logging sites. It was defending its territory, its habitat. The forests were being cut down and Bigfoot was fighting back, not against people, against the machines, against the tools we used to destroy its home. It was an act of protection, of desperation. And that was the shocking part. Not that Bigfoot existed, but why it was attacking. I couldn't let the footage disappear. Sarah had dismissed it. The timber company wanted to bury it. But I knew it was important. I made copies, saved them in multiple locations, cloud storage, external drives. I even burned it to DVDs. I wasn't going to let this evidence vanish. I called Marcus, asked him what he was going to do. He said he was looking for other work. The timber company had blacklisted him. Word had spread that he'd tried to fake a Bigfoot attack to cover up equipment damage. No one would hire him. His career was over. I felt guilty. I'd been the one who suggested showing the footage. I'd thought it would help. Instead, it had destroyed everything. "I'm sorry," I said. Marcus sighed. "It's not your fault. We did the right thing. We showed them the truth. They just didn't want to see it." But I couldn't accept that. The footage was real. Bigfoot was real. And somewhere out there, in the forest, it was still protecting its home. I decided I needed to go back. Not to the logging site, but to the forest itself. I needed to understand what we'd been destroying, what Bigfoot was trying to save. I drove out to the Cascades a week later, not to the cleared area, to a section deeper in where the trees were still standing. Old growth, massive pines that had been there for hundreds of years. I parked at a trailhead and started hiking. The forest was dense, quiet, beautiful. After an hour, I found what I was looking for. Signs of Bigfoot, footprints in the soft earth near a creek, massive prints, at least 18 inches long. I followed them. They led me to a clearing. In the center was a structure, not a building, a shelter, made from branches and moss woven together. It was crude but deliberate. A home. I stood at the edge of the clearing, staring. This was where Bigfoot lived. This was what it was protecting. Not just trees, not just forest, its home. And we'd been cutting it down, destroying it, taking it apart piece by piece. I felt a wave of shame. We'd called it vandalism, destruction. But Bigfoot had been defending itself, defending its family, its habitat. What would I do if someone came to my home and started tearing it apart? I'd fight back. I'd protect what was mine. I heard a sound behind me, a low grunt. I turned slowly. Bigfoot was standing at the tree line, maybe 50 feet away. It was watching me. I froze. My heart pounded. We stared at each other, and in that moment I understood. Bigfoot wasn't a monster. It wasn't a threat. It was just trying to survive, trying to protect what little it had left. I raised my hand slowly, a gesture of peace. Bigfoot didn't move. We stood there for a long moment. Then it turned and walked back into the trees. I watched it disappear. When it was gone, I left the clearing and hiked back to my truck. I decided not to release the footage. Not yet. I knew what would happen if I did. It would go viral. News crews would descend on the forest. Hunters would come looking for Bigfoot, trying to prove it existed, trying to capture it, or kill it. And I couldn't let that happen. Not after what I'd seen, not after understanding what Bigfoot was protecting. But I also couldn't let the truth disappear completely. I started reaching out to researchers, Bigfoot investigators, people who'd spent their lives studying sightings and evidence. I sent them portions of the footage, not the full video, just clips, enough to show that something real had happened, but not enough to pinpoint the location. The responses were mixed. Some researchers were excited. They said the footage was the clearest evidence of Bigfoot they'd ever seen. They wanted more. They wanted to know where it was filmed. They wanted to organize expeditions. I refused. I told them the location had to stay secret to protect the creature. Others were skeptical. They said the footage looked too good, too clear, that Bigfoot sightings were always blurry, always ambiguous. The fact that my footage was high definition made it suspect. They accused me of faking it, of using CGI or a costume. I stopped responding to those messages. One researcher, a man named Dr. Henry Vaughn, stood out. He'd been studying Bigfoot for 30 years. He'd collected thousands of reports, analyzed hundreds of footprints. He believed Bigfoot was real, but he also believed it was endangered, that its habitat was shrinking, that logging and development were pushing it to extinction. I sent him the full footage. He called me 2 days later. "This is incredible," he said. "This is exactly what I've been saying for years. Bigfoot isn't aggressive. It's defensive. It attacks when its territory is threatened, when its home is destroyed." He asked if he could publish a paper about the footage. I agreed, on the condition that he didn't reveal the location. He promised. 3 months later, his paper appeared in a cryptozoology journal. Evidence of defensive behavior in Sasquatch, a case study. It included still frames from my footage, analysis of Bigfoot's movements, discussion of its motivations. The paper didn't make mainstream news, but in Bigfoot research circles, it was groundbreaking. People started talking about habitat protection, about the ecological impact of Bigfoot's existence, about the need to preserve old-growth forests, not just for trees, but for the creatures that lived in them. I felt like I'd done something right. I hadn't exploited Bigfoot. I hadn't turned it into a spectacle. but I'd shared the truth in a way that might actually help. That might make people think about what we were doing to the wilderness. Marcus called me after the paper came out. He'd found work with a smaller company, doing reforestation, planting trees instead of cutting them down. I keep thinking about that video, he said, about why Bigfoot did what it did. It changed how I see things. I can't go back to logging. Not after that. A year passed. The timber company never returned to that section of forest. The damaged equipment was eventually removed, but the land was left alone. Officially, it was still designated for logging, but no crew wanted to work there. Word had spread, the site where Bigfoot attacked. Most people didn't believe it, but enough people were unsettled that the company couldn't find workers willing to go back. I moved on to other jobs, other security gigs, but I couldn't stop thinking about Bigfoot, about that clearing in the forest, about the shelter made of branches and moss. I started volunteering with conservation groups, helping protect wilderness areas. It felt like the least I could do. I went back to the forest every few months, always to the same clearing. The shelter was still there. Sometimes I'd see new footprints, evidence that Bigfoot was still around, still living there. I never saw it again in person, but I felt its presence, knew it was watching. I started leaving things: food, apples, bread, dried meat. I'd place them near the shelter and leave. The next time I visited, the food would be gone. I didn't know if Bigfoot was taking it or if animals were, but it made me feel connected, like I was helping in some small way. Dr. Vaughn continued his research. He published more papers, gave talks at conferences. He became a leading voice in the movement to protect Bigfoot habitat. He never revealed the location of my footage, but he used it as evidence, as proof that Bigfoot wasn't just a myth, that it was a real creature facing real threats. One day, he called me with news. There's a proposal to designate certain areas of the Cascades as protected wilderness, he said. No logging, no development. It's partially because of your footage. People are starting to understand that we need to preserve these forests for Bigfoot. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe something good could come from all of this. Maybe Bigfoot's attack hadn't been in vain. It had stopped one logging operation, and now, indirectly, it might stop many more. I thought about releasing the full footage, making it public, the impact it could have. But I also thought about the consequences, the hunters, the tourists, the people who would flood the forest looking for Bigfoot, turning it into a circus. I decided to keep it private. The footage had done its job. It had convinced the people who needed to be convinced. That was enough. I started documenting everything in a journal: the attack, the footage, my visits to the forest, my conversations with Dr. Vaughn. I wanted a record, something permanent, in case anything happened to me, in case the footage was lost. I wanted the story to survive because it wasn't just about Bigfoot. It was about what Bigfoot represented: the wilderness, the wild places that were disappearing, the creatures we were pushing to extinction without even realizing it. Bigfoot had fought back, and in doing so, it had shown us what we were destroying. I met with Dr. Vaughn in person 2 years after the attack. He wanted to see the original footage, the unedited files. I brought my laptop to a coffee shop in Seattle, and we sat in a corner booth. I played the full video for him, all 11 minutes of Bigfoot destroying the bulldozer. He watched without speaking. When it ended, he leaned back and closed his eyes. "Do you understand what you have here?" he asked. I nodded. "Proof," I said. He shook his head. "Not just proof. A message. Bigfoot is telling us to stop, to leave its home alone, and we're not listening." He asked if I'd ever considered what would happen if the footage became public, if it went viral, if millions of people saw it. "It could change everything," he said. "It could force governments to take Bigfoot seriously, to protect its habitat legally. It could save the species." But I'd thought about that, and I'd seen what happened when Bigfoot sightings became public. The Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967, the most famous Bigfoot footage ever. It had been analyzed, debated and dismissed for decades. Believers said it was real. Skeptics said it was a hoax, and nothing changed. The forests kept being cut down. Bigfoot kept being pushed further into the wilderness. If I release this, it'll be the same, I said. People will argue about whether it's real. Some will believe, most won't. And even if they do, what then? Bigfoot becomes a tourist attraction. People flood the forest trying to see it, trying to photograph it, and Bigfoot disappears. Or worse. Dr. Vaughn understood. You're protecting it, he said. I nodded. Just like it was protecting its home. That's all I'm doing. He respected my decision, but he also made a request. Let me use the footage in my work, not publicly, but in private presentations, to conservationists, to policymakers, people who can actually make a difference. I agreed. It felt like the right compromise. Over the next few years, Dr. Vaughn showed the footage to select audiences, environmental groups, wildlife protection agencies, even some government officials. The reactions were always the same: shock, disbelief, and then slowly, acceptance. The footage was too clear to dismiss, too real. It started making an impact. Small at first. A few logging permits were denied in areas where Bigfoot had been sighted. Some wilderness areas were expanded. Protections were put in place, not because of Bigfoot specifically, but because the footage had made people think about habitat, about preservation, about what we were losing. I continued visiting the forest, the clearing, the shelter. Bigfoot was still there. I'd find evidence, footprints, broken branches arranged in patterns. Once, I found a stack of stones near the shelter, smooth river stones, carefully balanced. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a message, like Bigfoot was acknowledging my presence, accepting it. I never tried to see Bigfoot again, never set up cameras, never waited in the clearing hoping for an encounter. I'd learned my lesson. Some things aren't meant to be captured. Some things are meant to be left alone. The protected wilderness designation passed in 2018, 3 years after the attack. It covered 200 square miles of old-growth forest in the Cascades. No logging, no development. The official reason was biodiversity, endangered species habitat. But I knew the truth. Dr. Vaughn had shown the footage to the right people, had made them understand what was at stake. I drove out to the forest the day the designation was announced. I hiked to the clearing and stood near the shelter. You did this, I said out loud. You saved this place. I didn't know if Bigfoot could hear me, but I wanted to say it anyway. I thought about that night in November 2015, watching Bigfoot flip a bulldozer, watching it tear apart machines with its bare hands. I'd been terrified, amazed, confused. But now, I understood. Bigfoot hadn't been attacking. It had been defending, fighting for its survival, for its home, and it had won. Not through violence against people, but through an act so shocking, so undeniable that it forced us to pay attention. The footage had done what thousands of sightings couldn't. It had made Bigfoot real, not to everyone, but to enough people. I still had the footage, stored safely, backed up in multiple locations. I thought about what would happen to it after I was gone. Whether someone would find it, release it, turn it into the spectacle I'd tried to avoid. I hoped not. But I couldn't control that. What I could control was how I used it now. I'd given Dr. Vaughn permission to continue showing it privately, to use it for conservation work. That felt right. The footage wasn't mine. It wasn't entertainment. It was evidence of Bigfoot, of habitat destruction, of the fight to survive. Marcus and I stayed in touch. He'd become a passionate conservationist. He gave talks about his experience, about watching Bigfoot destroy the equipment, about understanding why. He never showed the footage. He respected my decision. But he told the story, and people listened. Ray, the logger who'd wanted to quit, had left the industry entirely. He worked for a national park now, giving tours, teaching people about forest ecology. He told me once that seeing Bigfoot had changed his life, made him realize what he'd been destroying. He'd spent 20 years cutting down trees without thinking about what lived in them. Now he spent his days protecting them. The other crew members moved on, found other jobs. Some still logged, some didn't. But they all remembered. They all knew what they'd seen, and none of them ever went back to that section of forest. The timber company eventually sold the logging rights. The new owners never tried to develop the land. It sat empty, wild, as it should be. I thought about Bigfoot often, about whether it knew what it had accomplished, whether it understood that its attack had saved its home. I like to think it did, that somewhere in that forest Bigfoot was living peacefully, protected, safe. And that was enough for me. I still get contacted sometimes, researchers who've heard about the footage, journalists who want the story, documentary filmmakers offering money. I turn them all down. The footage stays private. The story stays quiet. That's how it has to be. Some people think I'm selfish, that I'm withholding evidence that could prove Bigfoot exists. Maybe they're right. But I saw what happened when we invaded Bigfoot's territory. I saw the destruction it was willing to cause to protect its home, and I won't be responsible for invading it again. Dr. Vaughn passed away in 2020. He was 73. In his will, he left his research to a conservation archive, including notes about my footage. But not the footage itself. He'd honored his promise, kept the location secret, kept Bigfoot safe. I attended his funeral, met his family. They thanked me for trusting him, for sharing the evidence that had driven his final years of work. The forest is still protected, still wild. I visit less often now. My knees aren't what they used to be. The hike to the clearing is harder, but I still go. Once or twice a year. I still leave food, still check for signs. Bigfoot is still there. I know it is. The footage sits on my computer, backed up, encrypted, waiting. I've thought about deleting it, destroying the evidence completely. But I can't. It's too important, too real. Someday maybe it'll be needed. Maybe the protections will fail. Maybe the forest will be threatened again. And if that happens, I'll release the footage. I'll show the world what Bigfoot did, what it was protecting. Until then, it stays hidden. A secret between me, Bigfoot, and the forest. Some people don't believe Bigfoot exists. They think it's a myth, a legend. I let them think that. Because as long as people don't believe, Bigfoot stays safe, stays hidden, stays protected. It's been years now since that November night, since I watched Bigfoot destroy a bulldozer on camera. The shocking part was never the attack itself. It was the reason behind it. Bigfoot wasn't a monster, it was a protector, fighting for its home the only way it knew how. I've kept my promise. The footage remains private. The forest remains protected. And Bigfoot remains safe. That's all I ever wanted. I think about that clearing sometimes, about the shelter made of branches, about the footprints in the snow, about the creature that trusted me enough to let me see its world. People still ask if I believe in Bigfoot. I tell them I don't know. It's easier that way. The truth is, I don't believe in Bigfoot. I know Bigfoot. I've seen it, I've protected it, and I always will. That's the real story. That's what the footage shows, and that's why it will never be released.